My name is Karen. 6 months ago, I sold an estate that had once been a source of so much pain and humiliation for me. Now, I've started my own firm and built a life based on contracts, not guilt. But it all started on that fateful night at the estate in the mountains. I was in a cheap motel room in Truckee, the door locked tight as if I was expecting a war. I finally looked at my phone, which had been blowing up with 73 missed calls and 40 texts. I blocked those numbers without a second thought and exhaled for the first time in what felt like decades. Then, the room was filled with blue light. Police. 2 squad cars. And there was my father, Henry, smiling in the snow. He'd reported me for felony theft, claiming I stole jewelry and heirlooms. He played the part of the grieving father so well, offering me a deal, return, finish the dinner, and he wouldn't press charges. It was jail or servitude. But I wasn't afraid. I told the officers to search the truck. They found only food and linens, all legally purchased by me. I showed them the receipts, and the so-called theft vanished. However, the false report remained. I then handed over the trust deed. The house was mine. Henry's life estate had a clause that hosting an engagement for a romantic partner terminated his rights immediately. And that's exactly what he'd done. For the first time, he wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at his landlord. I asked the police to remove him for trespassing, and they gave him 20 minutes to pack. The propane had run out shortly after I left. The party froze, the guests fled, and the engagement collapsed by morning. But how did I get to this point? Let me rewind. I'm a successful event planner in Seattle, managing multi-million-dollar budgets and dealing with egos as big as small kingdoms. But when I arrived at the mountain estate that my mother had bought before she passed away, my status evaporated. Henry blocked the main entrance of the estate. The wind was a bone, chilling 10 degrees below zero, but his words were even colder. He shoved a crumpled plastic bag into my chest. Inside was a shabby black polyester catering uniform and a stained apron. Olivia's family is inside, he said, checking his watch. They're high-class people. We can't have your single, girl desperation ruining the look at the main table. Use the service entrance. And Karen, the steaks need to be medium, rare. Don't embarrass me. I stood there, holding that cheap apron while the money I'd spent on the food for the party was sitting in the fridge inside. I walked through the service entrance, and the heavy steel door shut behind me, sealing out the cold and whatever dignity I had left. The kitchen was huge, shiny with stainless steel and marble. It was a cold, sterile reminder of my mother. Once I stepped in, I was no longer the successful event planner. I was just the help. I'd bought all the food with my own money, tomahawk steaks, truffle butter, vintage Cabernet. It cost me $8,500 on my personal card because Henry had claimed his money was tied up in Olivia's engagement ring. As I was arranging the appetizers, my aunt, Grace, marched in. She didn't even say hello. She scanned the counter, looking for any flaw. You're late starting the prep, she snapped. Olivia's parents are already judging the decor. We need this to go smoothly, Karen. Your father is under a lot of stress. I paid for the steak, Grace. I retorted, my knife hitting the cutting board hard. And he raised you alone, she shot back, using her favorite excuse. He sacrificed everything for you after your mother passed. The least you can do is make him happy today. Don't be so calculating. Calculating. The word hung in the air, heavy and ironic. For years, I'd asked myself why I kept showing up, writing the checks, and letting them treat me like an inconvenience. I used to think it was because I was kind, but standing there, slicing lemons for a party I wasn't even allowed to attend, I finally understood. It was normalized cruelty. In this family, affection was a currency. I'd learned to pay rent instead of loving. Henry hadn't raised a daughter. He'd trained a servant. Every time he withheld praise until I did a task, every time he sighed in disappointment until I opened my wallet, he was conditioning me to think my value came from my labor and compliance. Grace watched me, waiting for me to apologize and promise to do better. Instead, I picked up the black polyester apron and tied it around my waist tightly. Something inside me shifted. It was like a lock snapping shut. If they wanted me to be the help, I would be. But they forgot that the help expects to get paid. And if the client breaks the contract, the help has the right to leave. I'll have the appetizers out in 10 minutes, I said flatly. Grace nodded, satisfied that she put me back in my place. She left, not seeing the look on my face. She didn't know she'd just spoken to a contractor about to audit the account. The guests arrived in a fleet of black SUVs, stepping out into the snow in fur coats and expensive boots. They were Olivia's people, the wealthy and the privileged, who didn't even look at the staff. I circulated through the grand foyer with a silver tray of champagne, my head down, invisible as always. It was a skill I'd perfected over the years. I watched Henry hold court by the fireplace. He looked like the kind patriarch, one hand in his pocket and the other gesturing with a crystal glass. He was telling a story about sourcing the vintage Cabernet that I'd driven 4 hours to find. I had it flown in, he lied, his voice full of false modesty. Nothing but the best for Olivia. You know me, I don't cut corners. I gripped the edge of the tray until my knuckles turned white. He wasn't just taking credit for the wine. He was taking credit for my taste, my effort, and my money. Then Olivia drifted over. She was elegant, wrapped in cashmere, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked at Henry, and then around the room. Henry, darling, I thought you said your daughter was coming. I was hoping to meet her. The room went quiet. I froze near the drapes. This was the moment he'd acknowledge me. But Henry laughed, a short, dismissive sound. He pointed at me with his glass, not inviting me over, but treating me like a piece of furniture. Oh, that's her, he said loudly. She's helping out today. Poor thing is struggling with her little event, planning business in the city. I told her she could work off some debt by doing the service. We try to help family when we can, right? The guests chuckled, a polite but pitying laugh. Olivia looked at me, her expression changing from curiosity to mild disgust. Oh, she said. That's very generous of you, Henry. I stood there, paralyzed in my black uniform. He hadn't just insulted me, he'd erased me. He'd taken my successful career and made it seem like a charity case. He'd turned his exploitation of me into a way to look good in front of his new friends. I didn't drop the tray. I didn't scream. I just turned around and walked back into the kitchen. The humiliation had turned cold, absolute, and final. I was in the kitchen, staring at the wall, when the swinging door banged open. Henry stormed in. The kind, patriarch mask was gone. His face was red, his eyes narrowed. Pick up the pace, Karen, he hissed. People are waiting for the second course, and stop sulking in the corner. It looks unprofessional. He didn't notice I was shaking. He didn't care. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. He slapped it on the stainless steel counter. Take care of this, he commanded. The propane company called. The tank is at 10%. They need payment before they'll send the emergency truck tonight. It's going to be 20 below zero. Olivia likes it warm. I looked at the bill. It was for the emergency refill, another $1,200. You want me to pay for the heat? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Consider it your contribution, he said, turning towards the door. Since you're not bringing a gift. And he walked out. The door swung shut, thumping rhythmically. Something inside me snapped. It was a silent, clean break. The bond that had held me to him for so long, the guilt, the hope, the need to be good enough, just disappeared. I looked at the propane bill, then at the industrial refrigerator, where $5,000 worth of my food was waiting to be plated. I picked up my phone and called the gas company. This is the resident at the mountain estate, I said steadily. I'm canceling the emergency delivery. We won't be needing it. I hung up, grabbed a marker and a sheet of cardstock. I wrote in bold letters. Invoice, catering services, $8,500, logistics and labor, $2,500, past due balance, $4,000. Total due upon receipt, $15,000. I taped it to the refrigerator door at eye level and added a line below the total, services suspended for non-payment. I took off the apron, folded it neatly on the counter. I wasn't the help anymore. I was the collection agency, and I was closing the account. I walked out into the blizzard. The cold hit me like a slap, but for the first time that day, I didn't flinch. I climbed into my truck, started the engine, and backed it up to the service ramp. I loaded all the food and supplies I'd bought. The wine, the steaks, the truffles, everything. It took me exactly 12 minutes. When I was done, the kitchen was empty and sterile. The only thing left was the white invoice on the refrigerator, stark against the steel. I took one last look. I realized that the so-called family table didn't matter. The only power I had was the power to walk away. I locked the service door behind me, climbed into the truck, and drove away. The drive was dangerous, with the snow blinding the windshield wipers. But as I got farther from the estate, I felt a physical release. My shoulders dropped, and the knot in my stomach untied. I'd canceled the emergency propane delivery just before 6. The estate would run out of heat in a couple of hours, turning into an icebox in the middle of the blizzard. This wasn't cruelty. It was just accounting. He'd taken so much warmth from me over the years. Now he'd feel the cold. And that's how I went from being the exploited daughter to the empowered woman who took back control of her life.